Hi, welcome to the Three Times Podcast. Today I'm talking to Vic Gammon, a distinguished music historian, teacher and a composer and player in the traditional folk style. A man who, in a very full musical career, has played with folk aristocracy including Martin Carthy and Judy. Vic moved to the northeast to teach folk and traditional music at Newcastle University. He now lives in Tyndale and can sometimes be found playing in folk sessions in local venues. You can find more of Vic's music online. The links are in the show notes. The tunes he plays are The Man in the Moon on the concertina, Bob Chaddock's Jig on the banjo, and Mole Sims on the tenor guitar. This episode has two parts. This is part one. Vic Gammon, thank you for agreeing to do the podcast.
You're very welcome.
Can I ask you first about Englishness in your work? I saw in one interview that you gave that somebody suggested your work was very English in nature. What do you understand by that?
Yes, well, that's always been the subject of what I've done, really. It is. I mean, I just think you can't spread yourself too thinly. I mean, I'm going to Scotland in a couple of weeks' time to sit for a Scottish music session. I'm interested in North American music, but in terms of research, I've tended to concentrate on English music, and if you want to go further, I concentrated on Southern English song and music. I don't think it's. I'm not a nationalist or chauvinist or anything. I think it's a bit like. I suppose one of the big influences on me was the historian E.P. Thompson, because I did history at university, not music. I mean, his interest in the English was one of the things which set me off, and also there was a movement in the 50s. That I think was not well founded, but with Ewan McCollum, Bert Lloyd and people like that who said you really ought to look at the music from your own background, your own culture, which I actually don't think is very valid now. I think you can play any sort of music, anybody can, but it made you sort of focus and see what was there when, you know, at that stage very little was known about aspects of, say, English music and so on. We know a lot more now. So I think it's given me a focus and a direction which has been interesting, and it's sustained me really. Yes, I suppose it's true. I mean, I've not written a lot. I used to teach a course when I was teaching at Newcastle University and Leeds. I taught courses on the music of the southern states of the USA, but it's not something I've particularly researched. I've done tiny bits of writing on it, but basically the focus has been on England, English music and so on.
And I think we could all tell the difference between American music and English music and Scottish music if we heard it, but what is the difference in music theory terms?
Well, I think it's more related than you might suggest, because a lot of British music went to North America and became transformed over there, but you find, if you know, some of the collections made, say, in the Appalachian Mountains, a lot of absolutely British material is still performed by some people there. I've also become interested in the ways the transatlantic exchanges that took place. It's quite early. I mean, we think of, the 1920s and the music that came out of that period, the Great American Songbook and things like that. But actually, I mean, the songs of Stephen Foster from the 1850s were being published on British broadsheets, song sheets, and the music was being published in cheap editions. I did a recording for Fellside Records in 2016 called Early Scottish Ragtime. I mean, the title is a joke, but I was trying to show connections between music that was published in Britain in the 18th century, mainly in Scotland, mainly in Glasgow and Edinburgh, although some of it in London, and the sort of pre-music that led up to the ragtime comes out around 1900 with Scott Joplin and Turpin and players like that. But also some of those musical techniques are there quite early on. And if we look at a Scottish tune book like Kerr's Merry Melodies, a wonderful tune book from the 1880s, I think we think now. It's not dated. Then actually there's quite a lot of American material in there, and so I was quite interested in that music that came back from America before the age of radio and recordings and so on. So I think there's always been an exchange going on. Some of the same songs get sung in Britain, in England, Scotland, Ireland, and North America. You get the same songs, like a song like Barbara Allen, which we can trace back. I've been working on a long-term study of that for a long time. You can trace it back to Pepys's Diary is the first mention we have of it, 1666, the year of the fire and plague and so on. And it's then had an ongoing. People are still recording that song. I just think, it's not top of the charts, but 3 or 4 recordings are made every year of that song. Now that is interesting. Just to me, that is very interesting. A song from basically the 17th century still comes through to us, and it exists in most parts of the English-speaking world.
But would a song like that be interpreted differently?
It'd been sung with
In what way would those interpretations?
Well, there's certainly an English style of singing which is sort of fairly forthright and direct and fairly unembellished. There's a Scottish style. The Scottish Travellers particularly had a real distinctive style of singing. They didn't mind taking 8 minutes over a song. They didn't mind an unaccompanied song lasting that long.
So prog rock isn't anything new then, or wasn't it in the 70s?
Well, I think time is so relative. I think before the age of mechanical reproduction, we had you could take time over things. I could sing you a song that lasts 8 or 9 minutes now, but with modern sensibilities, I think the single has got the 78 and then the 44. It's 3 minutes and something, and that's really conditioned our response to popular song in some ways, because some songs used to be a lot longer than that.
Yeah. And of course now with the likes of TikTok, the attention span is
it 15 seconds the video on TikTok?
I think you have. I've been told you have something, I can't remember, it's 3 or 5 seconds to grab the listener's attention.
Yes.
And then the TikTok video lasts, 30 seconds, if that. So that's your format now.
Different world.
It is a different world, yeah.
I don't think it's my world. I really I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and I suppose some of my attitudes come from then.
Do you think that that folk music is still thriving in this day and age?
No, I don't think it is. I think I think what happens is quite cyclical. There's, there's, if you like, pre-industrial society where if you made any music at all, you sang songs you knew. If you were lucky enough to own a musical instrument, not many people did because poverty was widespread. Do you feed your family or do you keep your fiddle? There's that sort of question. Then I think a lot of music was homemade, and the only time you heard. What's interesting, reading. My thesis was on 19th century Sussex, And what was interesting is how amazing it was to hear music, because you didn't have it coming out of your radio, you didn't have it in shops and so on. It had to be someone doing it there. It had to be a singer, a fiddle player, or some sort of band, maybe a scratch band, or brass band, something like that. But or in church you might hear music in there. Not organs, actually. Majority of churches never had organs till the later 19th century. And some of my work has been on the church bands, the bands of instrumentalists that used to play in accompanying hymn singing and so on. So yeah, I think different ages produce different social and economic conditions, different experiences produce different responses to the world, and I think that's the way of it, really. I don't like aspects of the modern world, but not much I can do about them. On the other hand, I have computers, I have recording equipment, I have stuff that I can work with, and that's also a product of the modern world. I didn't have that years ago.
It's interesting your comment about church music, because now, I'm not a regular churchgoer, but the past few occasions when I have been to a church, rather than a grand place like the Abbey, there's been recorded music for people to sing along to.
That's terrible.
It's not the image that you have of churches. But then at the same time, I've been struck while I've been doing this podcast by how much music people are making.
Yeah.
So it's not as if individual music making has gone out of fashion completely, and people are entirely passive in their consumption of music.
Well, I mean, years ago, I remember reading. Do you know Simon Frith at all?
I know the name. He's a historian who lives in Hexham.
He's historian of music, sociologist really, but interesting man, and written a lot of stuff. And he was professor at Glasgow. He's retired now, but I remember reading one of his books years ago, and he reckoned there were 50,000 rock bands in Britain, and this was like in the 1970s or 80s or something. Yes, there's a lot of interest in the fact that sales of musical instruments go on. I mean, there's a lot of active interest. I think that's great. I mean, I like that grassroots stuff. I think that's where it should be, really. It's like I'd rather have the local football team playing than Newcastle United, owned by some group of foreigners or something.
Do you think that a lot of people share that view? Or?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if a lot of people shared my views, the world would be a different place. I always felt myself out on a limb, a bit of a oddball, bit of a radical, So.
And do you think there's a way to encourage more people to listen to the music that's local to them rather than?
I don't know. Yeah, I suppose there is. I mean, we just do what we can do. I was a professional musician for a short time. I really didn't like the life. I didn't like the constant travelling and the being away from home. I got very homesick. So I mean, my whole idea is to do as much as I can within, if I go out, I go to Corbridge sometimes, and I've been known to go to Newcastle once or twice. But I like that idea of being able to play locally, and I think there's a lot of interest. But as I say, it varies. I do believe it runs in these sort of parallel networks that don't actually intercommunicate very much. I think that's quite interesting and strange. I mean, I don't know when I last went to a classical concert, and it's not because I don't like it or disapprove of it or anything. It's just not what I do, I mean, I think COVID knocked a big hole in things. I think I was more active in sort of going to things and seeking out different things than I am now. But then again, I'm getting older, so I mean. One of the things I do find is that, I mean, we went to a performance at the Queen's Hall a couple of years ago now, but the volume that they had it at, I mean, there are legal limits on these things. I'm not sure everybody knows about them.
It's the venue's responsibility, isn't
it? Well, it is, and I don't want to be I don't have to take a decibel meter on my phone. You can do, but I don't have to complain. I just want to go somewhere comfortable. It really sort of put me off going to things because... So, things like that put me off a bit. I like acoustic music, I must admit. I like, as you can see from the instruments that I hear, I like music that sound on their own. It doesn't mean I won't use a microphone if the venue requires it, but I'm no... I have composed electronic music in the past. I mean, it's not a ideological thing, but I just happen to like messing around. That's why I play so many. I've always tried to play too many instruments. I've actually, believe it or not, cut it down recently to guitars and banjos all using the tenor tuning, so there's a similarity of technique. And the two squeeze boxes I play, the Melodian and the concertina, are actually quite similar in the way they work. So I've tried to sort of be sensible and not play too many different things. But I've always liked exploring what instruments will do. I think that's fabulous.
So you have, as you mentioned, taught at Leeds and Newcastle Universities on music courses.
And Huddersfield. Yeah. And Sussex part-time.
So you've had a long academic career.
But I didn't go to university until I was 26. 26 I went to university. I had a career in the travel industry before that.
Is that perhaps why you don't like travelling as a musician?
No, it wasn't that. It was much more the... if you're away, I remember doing a tour of Belgium in the 1970s, and Belgium's quite an easy country to get round. It's not very big, and we were in Flanders, in pretty near the centre, and they lent us a flat, so it was quite nice. It was rather cold. It was in the eaves of a building, but it was just, you play for maybe hour and a half, 2 hours. You spend ages getting there, you spend ages getting back, you spend loads of time just hanging around doing sound check. I mean, you don't actually get on with the thing that you like doing, which is performing. I also got I'm sort of a supporter of green issues, and I just thought it was this idea of spending your life driving around the country. I mean, some of my I admire some of them, some of my professional musician friends, but they clock up 70,000 miles a year. What's that doing for the planet? Not a lot. So I went into research and then education and so on. Always kept playing. I never stopped playing, performing. When I could, what was convenient.
So how do you think your academic pursuits influenced your music making?
Oh, it's totally linked. I mean, the exploring the stuff practically and exploring it historically are just two sides of the same coin. They're not. It's not like one box here and one box there. For example, this podcast I've just done for this guy in Sheffield. I mean, it's about a song called the Unfortunate Lad, or the Young Trooper Cut Down His Prime. That song has a real interesting history. You know, it's about an odd subject. It's about someone dying from sexually transmitted disease. You know, it's quite a strong subject, and it has certain, and yet it's spread throughout the English-speaking world. This song. And yet I've always sung that song as well. I've sung that song for years. And funnily enough, after we'd made the recording, I was digging around. This is my old computer. I'm digging around in the bowels of the memory of that. I found I'd recorded it in 2014. Too late for the podcast, but it was quite interesting. I hadn't remembered that I just made the recording of it because I fancied doing it and hadn't done anything with it particularly.
So in your interpretation, do you feel the weight of history on your mind when you're doing it, or do you think I'm going to do this consciously, do it in a different way?
I feel... No, I think I'm quite a believer in artistic freedom as well. I don't think history... You know, you do what you want to do. If, like, friends of mine play blues, that's great. You know, they've never been to Louisiana, they've never, encountered racism, but that's what they want to find out about and explore, that's fine. No, it's much more that I'm interested in the ways, in terms of history, the ways in which people invent it if they don't research it. I mean, that's one of my key points. Oh, it must have been like this. Oh, this would have been the case. Oh, that. You know, take things like the music pub session, which is a real commonplace of the folk music revival, the instrumental revival. You know, lots of musicians, maybe 20 musicians in a pub all playing together. I don't think it happened before the 1950s. I don't think that thing happened. I think most instrumentalists were fairly lone. That they might have played in twos, sometimes threes. You know, I just think when you find out about the stuff, it brings a whole new interpretation on what you're actually doing and why you're doing it. Now, I'm not a purist. I mean, I do believe in artistic freedom, and if people want to use rock instruments or strange ways, that's up to them. I mean, I don't have to like it, but I don't disapprove of it. But I think to understand something, if you don't investigate the history, you invent it, and if you invent it in ways that justify what you're doing. I mean, politicians are like this all the time.
As a kind of a follow-on from that, so I noticed in some of the stuff I was reading and interviews that you gave, that you made comments on the competence of a performer. Now, it's my understanding, my perception of the way that people talk about music these days is that competence is secondary, and that what counts is ideas and passion.
Yeah, I can go with that. I remember seeing. I used to live in Huddersfield for a time. I used to go to the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival. I remember seeing Brian Eno interviewed, and there was a sort of rather nice but fairly straight professor of music interviewing him, and he asked him, why these incompetent punk musicians are interesting, you see. And Eno said, because they've got soul. So you can't answer that, There are, I think in any field of music there are different levels of competence. I think that clearly, if you want to be a classical pianist, you've got to study, you've got to practice 7 hours a day, you've got to study for years and years, you've got to win contests, like the Leeds piano contests and things. But I think there's an interesting... I suppose that interest in competence was to do with attitudes within the folk revival that I was particularly criticising. That there was this idea that if there was a traditional performer, someone who'd been brought up within a musical tradition and just did it, that there was a sort of sacredness about them. And I don't believe that. I believe there were people who were really very, very good at what they did, and there were people who were not very good at what they did, and so I wanted to try and separate out notions of competence and style. So style is a way of doing it. I mean, a jazz musician always swings. They always use a degree of improvisation. That's to do with style. Now, how good they are, not everybody's an Oscar Peterson or a Thelonious Monk or a Louis Armstrong even, and I think it's just a very interesting critical point to try and separate out competence and style. Even one of the latest pieces of work I've done, it's not published yet, is a piece on the history of fiddle playing. Clearly, some of the traditional players that we come across we're talking from the 17th century through to the 19th, some of them were pretty incompetent. Others were really wonderful. I mean, in this area you had people like Willie Taylor, who was a shepherd up in the hills in Northumberland, and recordings of him are stunning. They still are. And he had a finger missing or something wrong with his hand, and just fantastic. Others, I mean, they just weren't. So I do think there's a qualitative thing, but that qualitative thing operates within a notion of style. That what am I trying to do here? How well do I do it? So I think it's just worth trying to pull those things apart and see them as an analytical.
Yeah. The inference from what you're saying is that there are some styles that don't require much competence.
I think that's true.
I mean, better expressed that way.
To sing in in some choirs, for example, I mean, you need to have some ability. You don't need to be a great solo singer because in a way you're carried along by the people with you. I think there's that sort of thing too. I think some musics are technically more demanding. If you look at this, as I say, I used to go to the Contemporary Music Festival in Huddersfield, and some of the stuff I really couldn't stand. Some of it I found fascinating because they were just playing with sound in a very interesting way. But some of the musicians were stunningly technical, but I don't... you can be a technical... This thing about soul, I talked about Eno and so on, you can be technically very, very accomplished and actually not be able to move people with your music. You can really sort of do something that's very flash and very, very intricate, but it may not have a lot of meaning. And yet some of the older, I'm quite interested in music of the 20s and 30s, particularly say the Black American music, and some of those guys they weren't necessarily great players, but my goodness, there's something about their music which grabs you. Something which really. So I do think there are different elements in play, and it partly depends on you as the receiver as well. What turns you on? What makes it sort of interesting.
Yeah. So do you think there's an element of folk music that excites and engages people in that way?
Well, I think people are different. I think it certainly engages me. It has engaged me since my teenage years. There's something about some performers that really do, make your spine tingle. And they can be instrumentalists, they can be singers. I think it's different now. There's no way that I would want to either proclaim the superiority of one type of music or the opposite. There's music I don't particularly respond to. We have a thing when the radio gets too, the Archers comes on or something, too awful to listen to. We sometimes pull a CD out at random and just stick it on and see what it is. Yesterday she just pulled a CD out and put it on. It was a woman who sings folk song called Frankie Armstrong. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Stunning singer. Just really wonderful singing. I mean, she's in her 80s now, but she was noticed back in the day by people like Wilfred Mellor, the professor at York, you know. But she just wow, this is something, you know. Just when you hear her, you think, my goodness, she can do something really interesting here, you know. But I get the same. I listen to Bessie Smith or something, to old jazz records. Particularly I like 1920s jazz. I like Jelly Roll Morton, for example. I love the way he combines fairly strict arrangement with a degree of improvisation and freedom within that form. I think it's just a wonderful balance he achieves. I could listen to that music, you know, just on and on.
And of course, there's that persistent beat.
Yeah,
It's the rhythm, isn't it, of that kind of music that hooked people.
Yeah, but it's also the interest of the. I think just a plain beat wouldn't do anything for you. I think. If we go back to the ragtime and the pre-ragtime music, I think it's the syncopation, it's the playing with the beat that's really, really quite interesting. You know, when if you take sort of, you know, even something well known like Joplin, da 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 da. You know, it's that across the beat playing that really is interesting. And you know, jazz musicians talk about swing, and it's, you know, it's almost undefinable, but you know when it's not there, and you know when it's there. Right, yeah. You know. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the 3 Times podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and tell your friends about it.